Was he studying crime or preparing for it? Bryan Kohberger. He wanted to understand how the criminal mind works. But what if he was the criminal mind? Welcome to Crime Stands Still Deep Cuts. I'm your host, Carrie Drobin. And before I dive deep into today's episode, I have an ask. Sign up for my free monthly newsletter and gain exclusive access to what doesn't make it into this podcast. We're talking behind-the-scenes details, bonus materials, survival strategies pulled straight from my new release, Surviving a Psychopath in Court, in Life, and in Love. Available on Amazon and anywhere where books are sold. If you're obsessed with true crime and ready to learn how to spot danger before it destroys you, this is where the real story begins. Subscribe now before the next red flag blinds you. So what makes someone disappear inside themselves until the only way out is murder? It was just after 4 a.m. on November 13th, 2022. In a quiet college town tucked into the hills of Moscow, Idaho, 4 students slept inside a 6-bedroom rental on King Road. They were best friends, roommates, a couple in love. It was a Saturday night like any other, laughing, watching TikToks, eating takeout, returning home from a bar. But as they drifted off to sleep, someone was watching. Someone who had been there before. Someone who knew the layout of the house. Someone who had turned off his phone and brought a knife. The first to be attacked were Madison Mogen and Kaylee Goncalves, who were sleeping in the 3rd-floor bedroom. The wounds were extensive, vicious. The medical examiner later revealed some victims had defensive injuries, meaning they fought for their lives. Others were ambushed in their sleep. Down one floor, Ethan Chapin and Zaina Kernodle were next. It's believed Zaina was awake. She may have heard the noise. Her injuries were the most severe. 2 other roommates were unharmed, one of whom later told investigators she saw a man in black clothing and a mask walking past her. She froze in place, terrified, and locked herself in her room. By daylight, blood pooled at the base of the house. It seeped through walls, and still no one knew what had happened inside. The scene was chaos, brutal, so violent that seasoned officers were called it the worst they'd ever witnessed. For nearly 7 weeks, the community lived in fear. Then, in late December, authorities arrested Bryan Kohberger, a 28-year-old PhD student studying criminology at Washington State University, just 10 miles away. His phone had pinged near the house at least a dozen times before the murders. Surveillance video showed his white Hyundai circling the neighborhood in the early morning hours. And most damning, his DNA was found on a knife sheath left next to Madison Mogen's body. He had studied serial killers. He had written to inmates, asking them how it felt to kill. And now, authorities believed he acted out his own thesis. Why? Arrested in Pennsylvania in December 2022, he eventually pleaded guilty on July 2nd, 2025, 3 years later, avoiding the death penalty in exchange for 4 consecutive life sentences, plus 10 years. He made no statement. He offered no motive. And in fact, the judge said continuing to ask why gives him the power he perhaps craved. Some say it doesn't matter why, that the act alone, the horror, is enough. That justice is served. The killer is behind bars. Case closed. But I disagree. Understanding the why is everything. Because if we don't ask why, if we don't examine what shaped Bryan Kohberger's mind, we leave the next one invisible. We miss the early signs. We write it off as evil and sleep easier at night until it happens again. Understanding the why doesn't excuse it. It doesn't diminish the pain. It helps prevent it. And for families left with silence, no motive, no note, no confession, understanding the why is the only thread some have left to pull on. It's the only chance at meaning in the wake of senselessness. Because when we stop asking why, we stop evolving. And in true crime, that's where danger breeds. In the dark corners, we refuse to look. As a former Capitol Defense attorney, I've spent decades exploring psychological dark matter, representing the worst of the worst, people like Bryan Kohberger, needing to understand the why of murder, not necessarily the what. We all know the what. That's what peppers headlines and documentaries, but often the why of what happened is missing. Because motive is not even part of a homicide prosecution. It's often the cold case, the unsolved mystery, that is the why. When I wrote the book Aurora, the psychiatrist who treated the movie theater killer tells her story. It was a chilling insider account of mass shooter James Holmes and the warning signs that were missed. It was an opportunity to look into the mind and the psyche of a mass shooter who deliberately survived his shooting so that people could study his brain. It was a window into all of the acts leading up to that brutal massacre at the Colorado movie theater. It was a way to understand so that maybe, just maybe, we could prevent the next one. In my latest book, Surviving a Psychopath, which features a foreword by Dr. Catherine Ramsland, who was Bryan Kohberger's former professor and one of the world's foremost experts on serial killers, my work explores the urgent question: what creates a killer? How can we see them coming? Are they born or made? Understanding pathology can be life-saving. It's what I have dedicated my life to, my work toward. It's why I do the deep dive. Because red flags aren't hindsight, they're warnings. So who was Bryan Kohberger? He was born in 1994 in the Poconos, eastern Pennsylvania. He was raised in a working-class family. His dad, Michael, was a maintenance worker. His mom, Marianne, was a school paraprofessional. He had a sister, Amanda, who, ironically, was a therapist. It looked like a normal family on paper, a successful family on paper. But something shifted for Bryan around middle school. According to James Patterson and Vicki Ward in their new release, The Idaho 4, Kohberger was bullied relentlessly about his weight. He was described as awkward, uncomfortable in his own skin, and increasingly isolated. At one point, classmates said he turned to heroin, a rare early descent for a suburban teen. And, I might add, extremely rare to recover from. He later claimed recovery, but by then the transformation had begun. His acquaintances called him weird, controlling, mean. He'd follow girls around school. One described him as staring too long, Another said he never seemed present, as if mimicking emotion, not feeling it. By the way, James Patterson and Vicky Ward interviewed over 300 witnesses for their book. Like many pathologically detached individuals, Kohberger didn't withdraw from society. He studied it, obsessed over it. He earned a master's in criminal justice, then enrolled in a PhD program at Washington State University, just miles from his future crime scene. He took a class from Dr. Catherine Ramsland, one of the world's foremost experts on serial killers, and BTK, bind, torture, kill. Kohberger created a survey for convicted criminals, asking them how they chose their victims, how they felt during the act, how they planned. The questions were clinical, cold, probably perfectly normal for a PhD student studying criminology. But one professor said it felt like he was, quote, rehearsing. So was he studying killers to understand them, or was he studying them to perfect his own fantasy? Bryan Kohberger didn't act out of psychosis. He wasn't hallucinating. He knew exactly what he was doing. What's far more disturbing is that he may have believed it was justified. Investigators have since uncovered something chilling. Kohberger's fascination with Elliot Rodger, the self-proclaimed, quote, incel and mass murderer who killed 6 people in Isla Vista, California in 2014 before turning the gun on himself. Rodger left behind a 141-page manifesto, and in it he laid out his grievances against women who rejected him and men who ignored him. He believed the world owed him affection, power, recognition. He wanted to become a symbol, a martyr, a legend. Kohberger reportedly studied Rodger. Some believe he idolized him. The similarities are hard to ignore. Both Elliot Rodger and Bryan Kohberger were rejected by women. They were both socially isolated, described as creepy by women. Women said that they stared too long. They were both obsessed with status and control. They both fixated on criminal minds, reportedly were controlling with peers. And Rodger created a manifesto, designed a detailed survey to learn how criminals chose victims. That was how Kohberger's, quote, manifesto became. They both carried out attacks with calculated cruelty. Kohberger stalked the King Road house for months, turned off his phone before the murders, chose a knife which was intimate and personal and brutal. Rodger saw his massacre as revenge, as a statement, a way to finally matter. We don't know if Kohberger felt the same, but he studied Rodger and he planned. And experts have noted that individuals with psychopathic or narcissistic traits often become obsessed with infamous killers, not out of morbid curiosity, but as blueprints. Kohberger didn't emulate Bundy. He didn't seek sadistic pleasure like Dahmer. He chose Rodger because Rodger was about rejection, invisibility, and maybe that's the answer that still eludes us. What if Kohberger didn't kill for thrill or rage, but because he felt erased? And in the most twisted way, This was how he forced the world to see him, the result of years of disconnection and rehearsal. The semester before the killings, Kohberger unraveled. He lost his teaching assistantship for inappropriate conduct, berating students, obsessively contacting a female professor. He began failing assignments. His behavior grew erratic. Those would be red flags. He also started visiting the victim's house 12 times over several months, according to cell phone records. He parked outside, always at night, watching. The fantasy was calcifying. In the weeks leading up to the crime, there's no record of escalating violence, but something in him snapped into place. Surveillance showed that he had turned off his phone the night of the murders, a key sign of planning. He brought a knife, left a sheath, spared a roommate, took nothing. Though he didn't lose control, there's ample suggestion of psychopathy or schizoid personality disorder marked by detachment, obsession, and inability to empathize. There was fixation on Madison Mogen. According to friends and family, Kohberger may have developed a romantic fixation on her when he first spotted her working at a restaurant, only to be rejected. The plan seems to have been centered on her. There were also digital clues investigators found. Porn searches with, quote, drugged and passed out themes, as well as searches on serial killers like Bundy, possibly clinical or voyeuristically compulsive. After his academic collapse, after the murders, he returned to Pennsylvania. He was calm. He visited a pharmacy wearing gloves. He drove cross-country with his dad, and during the drive he reportedly made morbid jokes about bodies in the trunk. Early bullying, possible neurological impairment, social alienation, academic failure, and a pathological need to control. This was the evidence investigators uncovered. But they raise the most frightening truth, that sometimes monsters aren't made in one moment. They are quietly manufactured over years in plain sight. There's no public evidence that his family knowingly helped cover up the murders, but questions remain. Why did they drive with him across the country so soon after the crime? Why was he wearing gloves inside grocery stores? Why were his digital devices wiped clean? Did they know? Or were they just as deceived as the rest of us? And more chilling, how many times had he hidden his darkness from them before? Thanks for listening to Crime Stands Still Deep Cuts. If this episode moved you, share it, subscribe, and remember, some of the most terrifying crimes aren't unsolved murders, they're unsolved people. Because for victims, crime stands still.